Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 392. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're honored to have with us the internationally celebrated touring comedian and now noir comic creator of the acclaimed Kill Stan, Deece Casillas.
Hey, what's up, guys? Hey, thanks for having me, Barney.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Deece. Yeah. So this is exciting because you just recently, as we say, you just had a very well-known touring comedian, and now you have just launched, and it's funded, by the way, fully funded Kill Stan, a bloody neo-noir crime thriller.
That is correct. Yeah. We funded in 5 days, which was amazing. So
Wow.
we've still got, we've been climbing incrementally since then. We're kind of in that valley in the middle of the campaign. Everything big burst in the beginning, then you hit the valley, and then you usually get a big push at the end. We're hoping to get to 6,000 before the end of this thing, so we can fully fund number 2 also.
Wow.
Just so I don't have to pay for it all out of pocket again. But we'll do it if I have to, I have to. But campaign's been great. There is still time to get in there and get your copies. Just because the campaign's funded, we still would love for you guys to get a copy and enjoy the book. And I think it's something that'll hook you if you give it a read.
Right. I mean, so you've backed Kickstarters before, but this is your first one. What are some of the things that you were surprised about when it came to launching a Kickstarter?
I'm not sure if there was a ton I was surprised about, to be honest. I've been doing arts and events and stuff for so long. You kind of get an idea of who that'll support you. You're going to get a certain amount of strangers that are going to support you. I have fans from comedy and other things I've done that just kind of support anything I do, which is great. So you kind of get an idea of who's going to be on board for that. I don't know if there was a ton that super surprised me. I spent a lot of time on Kickstarter researching stuff. I've backed stuff. I did a lot of work to put this book together. So it's like, it kind of went as I thought. So
Right.
Yeah, which is good, I guess. Not a lot of no big Shyamalan twist, that mind bending twist. I didn't find out I was dead this whole time. So,
Well, tell us about your journey from being a comedian to becoming a comic book writer, and how are these different creative paths have influenced each other?
yeah, I think well, first of all, I've always wanted to be all I wanted to ever do was write. Ever since I was a little kid, it's all I wanted to do. I would have, writing comic books I wanted to do. I wanted to write books, comic books. I want to write everything. And, comic books just seemed like an impossible feat, because when I was growing up, the industry was all in New York. So,
Right.
There was, me being in LA, there was, New York was literally the farthest place away from me, and still be in America. I couldn't even fathom that. So, I pursued writing. I published a book in 2011. I've written for a bunch of websites, some scripts, some shows, written stand-up comedy. Obviously I do. I've been doing stand-up comedy for almost 17 years now. So, it was great. I love comedy, and I wouldn't give up this career, but I finally got to a point where I'm like, no, I've always wanted to create a comic book. I've written hundreds and hundreds of scripts in my life for comic books. Like, I'm just going to do it. And I, hired the artist, hired the colorist, put the team together, and started getting this book that I wanted to do out there. Here we are.
Right. So what's your inspiration behind Kill Stan, and how did the idea for this the visceral story came to life?
Yeah, it's a lot of things, actually. So, Kill Stan, the impetus of Kill Stan was, I kept hearing the phrase "suicide by cop" tossed around. And this was around the beginning of COVID, that I was like hearing this tossed around more. And then I had the thought, suicide by vigilantism popped into my head. I'm like, oh,
Mm.
that's an interesting concept. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like that. And I started doing a little research, due diligence, and I never, I couldn't find a story that really had explored that concept at all. Also, my best friend, another comedian, right before COVID, had just taken his own life. So, like, a lot of that stuff was kind of in the ether and on my mind. And then COVID kind of extrapolated everything, because I think people, whether they realize it or not, it was a lot of trauma for people in a lot of different ways, and really destroyed a lot of lives, and really, I think people still carry around a lot of trauma from it that they may not even realize, and I wanted to express those feelings of loneliness, isolation, extreme despair, the lengths you'll go to, and what you'll do to when you have nothing left and nothing to lose. And that kind of got expressed through this story. It's funny because I call it a bloody neo-noir crime thriller, which it is that, but that's probably a little bit of a misleading slug line because you're going to get that, but really deep down, the story's about Stan. The story is about those things I just explained, our inner turmoil and the kind of conflict people go through when they have lost it all, and what that means to them, and how, people get to that place for different reasons, right? Like, some people get to that because they walked out of a movie theater with their parents after seeing Casablanca, and somebody shot their parents, and then they become Batman, or you just had a lifetime of like micro traumas that build up, and you find, you just don't have anywhere to turn. I always say, like, the worst thing that ever happened to you is still the worst thing that ever happened to you, right? Like, your worst thing on a general scale might be a 2 compared to other people, but it's still the worst thing that happened to you. So for your
Right.
experience, you don't know anything worse. So, like, and I wanted to express that people are valid for feeling those things, and that those do mean something, and they manifest in really crazy ways sometimes. This is taken to a pretty extreme circumstance, but that's comic books.
Well, so yeah, so Kill Stan has a unique combination of brutal action and psychological depth. Uh, who are some of your key creative influences?
Man, yeah. Honestly, creatively, I think I draw more from literature and
Hmm.
film than I do from comic books. I mean, there's certainly comic book creators I love, but I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, Chuck Palahniuk. I really like some classic. I read a lot of classic literature like Steinbeck, Hemingway. I really love H.G. Wells. Like The Time Machine is one of my favorite books of all time. You know, I try to bring elements of cinematography into the books and cinema. Like, I love Stanley Kubrick films. And I just want to bring certain aspects of like that kind of storytelling, the dark nature of it, but with purpose. Like, I always point to A Clockwork Orange as a movie that a lot of people have a real visceral and hard reaction to, because there's a lot of violence and a lot of sexual violence, and it's hard for people to watch and consume sometimes. But if you really watch that film or even read the book by Anthony Burgess, you are willing to kind of get past what's on the surface, you can see that all that is for a purpose. It's not just gratuitous to be gratuitous. It's
Hmm.
with intent to tell a more important story. And I think those things are important because, going through swimming through the hardest and ugliest parts are what make us more enlightened and emotionally intelligent and able to handle harder things in life. You know, ignoring them and pretending like everything's a Disney movie with a happy ending isn't reality. You know, so I think having having those hard things, and that may go hand in hand with comedy. You know, because in comedy you take hard topics and find a way to make people laugh about them. You know, so I think that's lends itself to my storytelling. As for comic book writers, you know, creators I grew up on Chris Claremont. I love, contemporarily, I love Joe Casey, Brubaker, Bendis, Millar, um, Greg Rucka, guys like that. Got more dirty noir, crime
Mm.
noir kind of feel.
How does your approach to writing and storytelling different when you're creating a comic book versus working on a stand-up routine or a novel?
Um, I would say it's my approach. My initial approach is probably the same. When I'm
Okay.
driving between gigs, you know, if I'm on the road and I'm like, you know, you're in one town, then you know you're 3 to 5 hour drive to the next one, or when I'm traveling in airplanes, anything. I usually don't listen to anything. I just sit there in silence like a psychopath. And if I'm in my car by myself, I talk and rant a lot to myself out loud, even.
Mm.
So and just kind of decompressing and letting thoughts out and hoping that my phone isn't listening because the I just kind of rant and sometimes just because I'm so busy all the time, I don't always get an opportunity to let things kind of declutter and file stuff, you know. So ideas will start pouring out, and if it's sometimes I'm like, oh, that's funny, and then I'll start talking into my phone and exploring that concept and then writing it down eventually, and then it'll develop into comedy. Or sometimes I'll be like, oh, that's an interesting idea that could be explored in like a comic book or a book, and then I'll go and thicken it out. So the initial nut is kind of comes out in near psychosis, and then uh, I'll eventually go through and listen to my notes, and then I'll start handwriting it. I like to handwrite things in the beginning because I feel more connected to it, and I'll
Mm.
also, it gives you time while you're writing because it takes longer to handwrite than type. Your brain thinks more, so you're not just dictating on a typewriter. I've found you're really connecting to it, and it makes my thoughts expand a little more, and I can get more into depth and really dive into the project.
So would you say because you write comedy and you also do like you say a bloody neo-noir crime thriller, is there certain points where you kind of like, throw like kind of pivot some of your darker themes by putting in some humor or satire into it? Because you mentioned Kurt Vonnegut. Is Would you say there's also some, like biting humor and satire
Yeah, yeah,
in your work too?
100%. I mean, I call almost anything I do uh, dark humor. Also, I mean, there's definitely dark humor in everything I do. Uh, I think most comedians are really cynical, and there's a lot of that cynicism in that kind of Vonnegut esque cynicism and send up of, you write things with bite, that with intent, like
Mhm.
I'm saying this, but I'm also really saying this, uh, so yeah, there's definitely a lot of that in my writing.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. Let's get into some of the meat of Kill Stand.
Yeah.
Um, so what can people expect from the Kickstarter?
Well, it's got so there's a trailer on there you can watch that gives you a little bit of a view of the tone. The It's got a 5-page preview of the
Oh,
book.
cool.
The first 5 pages are down there, so you can read those. Um, Again, as you can see, I really tried to make it very cinematic. I'm very detailed with my scripts as far as panel layout, breakdowns of pages, how I want them to look. I did a lot of work with my colorist to ensure the color was how I wanted it. We
Cool.
use a lot of color effect in this book. Um, and Yeah, I think if you read the preview, I think you'll get an idea of the tone of the book. I has spent some time in the Kickstarter giving you some background on myself, as well as my history with comic books, my love for comic books, and my plans moving forward with comic books. Um, but Yeah, I mean, it's I'm confident that any comic book fan or even non-comic book fan would really appreciate this book and the story we're trying to tell. It's hard because if you're not a comic book fan, especially if you're older, and I just mean older than like a teenager, there's a weird stigma about the comic book medium, but I think it's such a underrated and often overlooked medium as far as storytelling,
Right.
because there's such phenomenal stories being told in comic books that really I think are just some of the best stories being told period in any media, and
Right.
people overlook them because they just think, oh, comic books, whereas if you've ever read anything from like Brian K. Vaughan, like Saga or Why the Last Man, if you've ever read The Max by Sam Keith, if you've ever read like Joe Casey's run on Wildcats, you're like, these are not superhero books. These are, like Wildcats has superhero characters, but it's not that when Joe Casey was writing it. It was like a corporate espionage and satire on American economy and capitalism, and it's just brilliant that you can tell these stories using wild avatars, um,
Right.
I mean, if anyone out there has never read Why the Last Man, I mean, go read that and tell me that that's not one of the most phenomenal just stories you've ever captured in any medium.
Right. Well, and like you brought it up, and this is one of the things I love. Just attention is like as you said, comic books are a medium, not a genre.
Right?
And it's
Yeah.
the piece of it is like this, like the work that you're putting out here. It's you see at libraries. You do have some vigilante librarians, and I have some friends who are vigilante librarians. Will
It's a good
take
concept for a book. Uh,
yes, they'll take graphic novels. They'll see what this graphic novel is about, and they'll put it in the section of where it belongs. Like if it's a
mm,
graphic novel about a western, she puts it in the western section.
interesting,
This
interesting.
one's historical, she puts it in the historical section. She does not. She makes it very clear that she doesn't. She doesn't parse the graphic novels in the library based off of them just being a graphic novel because
Sure.
that's a medium, not a genre. As you said,
Yeah.
there's a lot that needs to go in. There's superheroes. Superheroes is a genre, not a medium. So it's,
Yeah.
but we're still, as you say, we're being faced with the point that people are increasingly starting to realize that the graphic novels um, can fit within any genre.
Yeah.
There's horror, there's western, there's historical fiction, there's science fiction, there's all kinds of stuff, and making sure that people have that realization. So yeah, kudos to you. And so like you say, Kill Stan, as I say, is this isn't for kids, correct?
It is definitely like R rated. It's not like a hard R. There's no nudity, but there's a good amount of violence and gore. There's some foul language, and there's some heavy tones we talk about. We talk about suicidal ideations. We talk about sexual abuse, child abuse, trauma, a lot of trauma stuff that, and things that, but they're hard things, but they're things that again I think I grew up Catholic, right? And Catholics don't talk about shit. Like we just stuff it down and then we drink. Like that's, and and I did that for a long time, and it's not healthy. So I think these things are good for people to read about, to hear about, to talk about, and get that stigma out and understand that, again, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It just has to be big, just has to be big to you, makes you
Right.
feel a certain way, then it's important. Um, so yeah, those are things we want to get people, thinking about. And, yeah, if you're willing to go on the journey and, bend back those pages and delve into the subtext of a story, you're going to get a pretty much deeper book than just a guy in a mask shooting some people.
I'm also kind of curious because you did mention that you've written some other prose, like your psychological thriller Insomniac.
Mhm.
Was this an evolution from writing psychological thrillers?
No, I mean, yes and no, I guess. That's just kind of the tendency. I think with every project, so I've written a couple books, and written a lot of different projects. Some have seen publication, some haven't. But every time I write something, I really try to write I write a different tone. I want to write from a different point of view. I want to write from a different genre.
Mm,
Because I want to challenge myself to creatively. I don't want to be
right.
Tom Clancy, or I'm not John Grisham and I've written 117 courtroom law books. It's like, great, you made it. I'm the, no shit. Good job, John Grisham. But like, whatever. Pelican brief is great. But like with the I want to explore. I want my mind to explore. I don't want to write on autopilot. I want to be
Mm,
actively digging and like feeling like it's a challenge. Like, oh, how do I write this? How do I write a character like how do I write a teenage Asian girl that's coming of age and struggling with her sexuality? Like that's so far away from me, but how do I grasp that?
right.
And so, although I like that kind of psychological thriller, darker noir tone a lot, and a lot of my writing style probably lends itself best to that, I definitely push to write other things.
So Deece, if people want to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place they could go to?
LA County Records court system will tell you a lot about. No, I would say you can go to, well, for the comic book, you can go to follow us on social media, inferno.earth on Instagram, Inferno Comics on Facebook. Inferno.earth is also our website. It's not inferno.earth.com. There's no .coms left anymore. So it's just inferno.earth. And yeah, that'll get you there. You can go to the Kickstarter, Kill Stan on Kickstarter. Please consider supporting the campaign, getting a copy of the book. You can get a copy for a digital copy for as little as $10. So I think, and I know you'll love it. And if you read the whole issue, especially, you'll be very intrigued, and you'll be back for number two. We have it planned. It's a 10 issue series in total.
Oh,
So,
cool.
yep. And then I've got another project after that that's coming, and another one after that, and another one after that. Uh, as for me in general, you can follow me at Deece.comedy on Instagram, or the Deece Casillas on Facebook, or Deece Comedy is my website. I'm check out my calendar. I do live dates all across the country. And I did just put out a special recently, Not Your Cup of Tea. It's available for sale on my website. It's right now we're doing a special. It's pay whatever you want. So you can name your price. You pay $5, you get the whole digital download of the special on video. But if you go to the Kickstarter for $30, you can get a signed copy of the comic book and the digital download of the comedy special. So go do that
There
instead.
you go.
Um, But yeah, follow me on Instagram on my both platforms, especially on inferno.earth. It helps a lot with getting us into conventions. They do look at your socials and your track record. So luckily I've got a couple conventions booked. So that helps too, them knowing you've been at past conventions. And yeah, just because we're funded, we're still trying to get the book into your hand is the most important thing, more so than, the funding at this point. We just want you to read the book.
Perfect. Well, this is great, Deece. And listen, come back on when you got issue 2 coming out. We love that. I had more questions for you, but I know we ran out of time. But come back on. This was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. Let me know.
You're in. All right. And that's why Vermont's the 14th state. So, and once we came in, then we pretty much opened the door for everybody to become states after that.
Yeah, and we just started busting it open for all the
exactly
any riffraff into the colonies.
Yeah, they'll just let anybody in now. They'll say those maple syrup making dudes. We're gonna let